Alright, hey, I'm Rowan, and today I'm going to try to make this look a little more reasonable and a little less intimidating. I recognize that the first time you look at a 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons character sheet, there is certainly a lot going on, and a lot of it doesn't make any sense. So I'm just gonna walk you through it. So we're gonna start at the top, because, that makes sense to me. Right off the bat, we have some fairly self-explanatory things. Character name is your character name. Your class is your class, rogue, paladin, cleric. And your level is your level. If you've ever played a video game, you know what levels are. Background is sort of what your character was doing before you were an adventurer. So if you are just starting out as a character and before the adventure starts, before the campaign starts, your character worked on a ship, you might take the sailor background. And each background has a certain set of bonuses that it gives you. Some resources it might give you, some skills that you're good at as a result, that would make sense for your background. And maybe some languages, tool proficiencies, things like that. Your player name is your name. Then there's race. So race is more than just a cosmetic thing. It's kind of like in the Elder Scrolls games, if you've ever played those. Certain races have different bonuses, essentially. Mountain dwarfs are extra good at making history checks about stonework, which is such an esoteric thing. Goliaths withstand cold better, just things like that. And there are more differences, but we'll get into those later when you have a proper background for those. Next is alignment. Now, if you've ever seen an alignment chart, which a lot of you probably have, people make a lot of memes about them. You have lawful to chaotic on one side and good to evil on the other, and it's a grid of 9 boxes, 3 by 3. And so you have lawful good, chaotic evil, neutral good, true neutral, that whole thing. That is alignment, and depending on the dungeon master, it is either a description of how your character acts, or it is an instruction on how your character should act. Personally, I'm more in the camp of alignment being descriptive, but just know that some dungeon masters will want you to pick an alignment and then have your character stick to that. Experience points, same with level. You get experience points for doing missions, killing monsters, whatever. And when you get enough, you level up. Now, importantly, experience points are one of the more controversial mechanics in 5th edition. I can't speak to how this works in other tabletop RPGs because I really only have experience with 5th edition, but there is a big schism between people who award experience points and people who do what's called milestone leveling, where upon completing a certain number of tasks or reaching a certain point in the campaign or doing something real cool, the party levels up. And again, this is the camp that I fall into, though unlike some other people who use milestone leveling, I don't necessarily think of experience leveling as a bad thing. But this is... You're going to get some people who have some very strong opinions about this. So that's it for the top of the sheet. So inspiration, we're not going to worry about right now. Trust me, it will make more sense later. Just remind me to come back to that. Next, we're going to skip on over to the left, and we have our stats. Strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Now, I'm briefly going to explain what each of these represent. Some of them are self-explanatory. Strength is how strong you are. Dexterity is both how nimble you are and how quick you can react to things. It's anything that a gymnast, someone really dexterous might have. Good reaction time, flexibility, they all kind of fall into that dexterity umbrella. Constitution is your ability to withstand things, I guess. It'll come into play if you get punched in the gut and you have to not, vomit. You want to, take that punch, or if you get poisoned and you're trying to resist the poison, or and really anything where you need to withstand something. That's Constitution. Intelligence isn't necessarily how smart you are. It's these three bottom, the mental stats, are all kind of murky. Intelligence, in the context of skills, is almost always memory, but intelligence, it's somewhere between memory and smartness. Just don't necessarily think of intelligence as your IQ. Wisdom is kind of like your experience through living and like experiencing things. If you look at the wisdom related skills, you have perception, which is spotting things, insight, which is figuring out if someone's telling the truth or if they're hiding something, survival, there it is, which is, you come across can you track these footprints through the woods? Is this mushroom poisonous, though that might also fall under nature? Things like this are up to DM discretion. But wisdom is just kind of how experienced you are with life. And charisma is not necessarily how well liked you are or how attractive you are. People often describe it as your sheer force of personality. Things that fall under charisma are things like deception, which is deceiving people. Intimidation, self-explanatory. Performance, it could be singing, playing an instrument, or acting, if you're not necessarily deceiving. Again, whether something could fall under performance or deception would be up to DM discretion. You'll learn that a lot of things are up to DM discretion. Persuasion, And so those are the 6 stats. Every one of these stats is going to have a score between 3 at the lowest and 20 at the highest. If you have a 3, you did something very wrong. For example, most wild bestial animals have an intelligence of 5, and they can't speak. If you have an intelligence of 5, as I recall, you are not allowed to know languages. So if you have a 3, you have messed up. You are barely alive. If any of these 3 mental stats drops to 0, you die just instantly, I believe. Don't come to this channel if you want 100% certainty on anything. So the way these stats are determined is up to your DM. There are multiple ways of generating your stat block, and your stat block will be 6 numbers that you assign to stats. The most common ways are standard array, where you have 6 predetermined numbers that you can put into your stats. Point buy, where you have an amount of points that you can spend on increasing your stats. Or, in my experience, I see it most commonly, is you roll 4d6, that's a 6-sided die. You roll 4 of them, drop the lowest, add those 3 up, and that is the stat. This is why you have a minimum of 3 and a max of 20, because as we all know, 3 times 6 is 20. I know it's actually 18. There is a reason for the 20 that we'll get into very shortly. So depending on your DM, you may have to roll 3d6, or you may have a modified standard array, but those are the 3 most common ways of generating your stat block. Now, I brought up earlier that different races have different bonuses, and this is one of the biggest ones. Nearly every race will give you a +2 bonus to a specific stat, and a +1 bonus to another stat. So let's say that you roll your stats, and you assign them to your stats, and you have a 17 in strength. But you are playing a half-orc. Half-orcs get a +2 to strength, so your strength is now 19. And this is why the maximum is 20, because the max you can roll is 18, and the max that any race will give you is a +2, giving you a 20. Now, with magical items, this can be increased further. When we say there's a max of 20, we mean a max of 20 without any serious interference going on. This is the max you can naturally get. And finally, while you have a number between 3 and 20, that is your stat, your score in that stat, you also have your modifier in that stat, which is often shortened to mod. The way this is calculated is hard to verbally explain, but you can either consider it half the distance from 10 rounded down, or take the stat, subtract 10, divide it by 2, and round it down. And when I say round it down, I mean round it to a lower number. So if you have a 13, 13 minus 10 is 3, 3 divided by 2 is 1.5, round that down to 1. If you have a 13 in dexterity, your dexterity modifier is +1. If it's 9, 9 minus 10 is -1, -1 divided by 2 is -0.5, round that down to -1. Whatever will get you the lowest number is the direction you round. So in that case, your modifier would be -1. And what your modifier is basically any roll you ever make with any die will include a modifier from one of your stats. And you roll your whatever die is associated with the roll, and you add your modifier. So if I told you to make a dexterity check, you would roll a d20, and if you have a 9 in dexterity, you subtract 1 from that roll. If you have a 17, you add 3 to that roll. And of course, the max, being that the max is 20, is you can add a 5 to your roll. Now, saving throws can be one of the more confusing things to understand for some people. Essentially, they are like any other roll for a check, like just a general strength check, except that the context in which you are asked to make one is more you are in some kind of immediate danger, or you are trying to resist something. Hence why it's called a saving throw, or it's often shortened to just save. So you might be asked to make a strength save if there's a cave-in and you have to prevent yourself from being crushed. A dexterity check might be you triggered a dart trap and you need to dodge it. Or if you cast Fireball, I think, don't at me, you make a dexterity check to avoid taking full damage. A Constitution saving throw could be resisting poison or trying to not get wasted if you drink a lot of alcohol. And the 3 mental stats, typically saving throws for those come into play if you are resisting a spell of some kind. And every class has proficiency in 2 saving throws. If you look at your class information, it'll list them. So now we get into proficiency, which will, as I said, will make more sense now. Your proficiency bonus is a positive bonus that is purely determined by your level. Levels go from 1 to 20, and there is a table you can look up. It's in the player's handbook. You can easily find a picture of it online that just explains at any given level what your proficiency bonus is. It starts at a +2, and your proficiency bonus, if you are proficient in a skill or in a saving throw, we'll talk about how that's determined later, then you can add your proficiency bonus to the roll. So if I'm proficient in Arcana checks, and you can see skills are nice, and they include every skill is based on a specific stat. Like I said, every roll is dependent on a stat. And skills specifically, acrobatics is a dexterity check. Animal handling is a wisdom check. And if I'm making an Arcana check and I'm proficient in them, and my intelligence modifier is 4, and my proficiency bonus is 2, I'm aware this is a lot of numbers, and I'm sorry, I would roll a d20 and add 6. That's my intelligence modifier plus my proficiency bonus for a total of +6. So, skills. I'm gonna quickly switch to an alternate character sheet that I don't like as much, but the perk of this is it sorts skills based on the stat they are associated with instead of alphabetically. So you can see that there is one strength-based skill, athletics, 3 dexterity-based skills, acrobatics, sleight of hand, stealth, no constitution-based skills, and a lot of intelligence, wisdom, and charisma-based skills. And skills are basically any... You break down most of the roles you might have to make into a set of skills. Arcana is knowing or remembering things about magic. You see some runes on the wall and you want to identify them, make an Arcana check. History, you want to know if what that building is, that old crumbling building, make a history check. You want to identify a religious symbol, make a religion check. Pickpocket someone, sleight of hand. Break into someone's house undetected, stealth. Determine if someone's lying, insight. And I can go more into depth with these later if people want, but for now we're just going to leave it at that. Oh, and animal handling is either driving like a horse, you're driving, you know how you drive a horse, or calming down an animal, befriending an animal, things like that. Most of the rest are fairly self-explanatory. So those are the skills. Armor class. So unfortunately, now I'm going to have to explain how combat works. And we are a ways into this video, and we're just now explaining how combat works. I'm going to try to keep this brief and just explain what you need to know to understand the sheet, because hopefully you'll learn about combat in more depth later, or maybe I'll make more videos and I'll talk about combat. Combat is an ordered list of people's turns. Everyone has their turns one after the other, and once everyone has finished their turn, that is one round. Each round represents 6 seconds, and you're supposed to envision combat not as people moving one after the other, but in the actual story of the game, everything is kind of happening at once, and we're just flashing between different people's perspectives. So armor class is the roll someone needs to make on an attack in order to hit you. Now, I should add the caveat that it's hit you effectively. There are 2 things that can give you a high armor class. Being very nimble means that you might be harder to hit, harder to pin down because you're real dodgy. Or having very good armor could mean that even if you're hit, things just kind of bounce off of you, the arrow snaps on contact with your chest plate, things like that. So the main contributors to armor class are your dexterity modifier and your armor. So, moving on. Initiative. Your initiative modifier, unless otherwise modified by an item or a feature or something. In most cases, your initiative modifier is just your dexterity modifier. And when combat starts and your DM says roll initiative, you will roll a d20 and you will add your initiative modifier, and then that determines where in the ordered list of turns you go. Person with the highest initiative goes first, person with the lowest goes last. And finally, your speed. Because a round only represents 6 seconds, and your turn is just a piece of that, you can only move a certain amount during any turn. Normally when you look at a battle map, you have like your mini figures out, and you're simulating the battle on a map. A square will represent 5 feet. So speed is always a multiple of 5 feet. The standard is 30 feet. So you can move 6 squares. And once you have moved 6 squares total, you can't move anymore. Once you've exhausted your speed, you are done until your next turn. So your hit points, that's your HP, that's fairly self-explanatory. You have a maximum, that is the highest it can go, and then you have your current. Temporary hit points, certain things will cause you to have temporary hit points that just kind of think of it as a shield. It's there, and if you get hit, that doesn't get taken away from your hit point total, but it doesn't come back other than that. A healing potion will re-heal your hit points. Temporary hit points are just that, temporary. So then we have hit dice. Every class has a certain hit die. On the low end, it is a d6, 6-sided die. On the high end, it is a d12, 12-sided die. And your hit die determines, that is how you determine your hit points. Every time you level up, you will either roll a hit die, as specified by your class, or take the average of the roll if you're a coward. And then you add your Constitution modifier, and that is how much health you gain. At level 1, you get the max. So if you have a d8 hit die, you get 8 health plus your Constitution modifier, and that's your hit points. From then on, you either have to roll or take the average. But you add your Constitution modifier every time you level up. So death saves, when you get reduced to 0 hit points, you don't just die, fortunately. You go down, you go unconscious. And if you are knocked unconscious, you have to start making death saving throws. And this is typically what determines whether you die. Every round on your turn, while you are making saves, you roll a d20. If it is 10 or higher, that is a success. If it is lower than 10, that is a failure. A natural 1 is 2 failures, and on a natural 20, you come back up, regain consciousness with 1 hit point. If you get 3 failures, you are dead. If you get 3 successes, you stabilize. You are still unconscious at 0 hit points, but you're not in danger of dying. And so you would mark any successes or failures here. Once you are either stabilized or back up or whatever, all of these are erased, and the next time you go down, it starts over. Next, personality traits are not quite quirks, but they're normally things like, you know, oh, I really like spending all my free time up in a secluded library, or, you know, I'm just things like that. Just personality traits. Ideals are things you value, and this could be honesty or bravery or strength, depending on who your character is. None of these have any mechanical application, to be clear. These are just things that help you flesh out your character during creation and can help you roleplay better. Bonds, I like to think of as kind of like ideals, but specifically ideals with how you relate to people. So these could be, my trust is very difficult to regain if broken, or I cannot stand dishonest people. I don't know why I'm going with this honesty vein. I'm very suspicious of strangers. I am very quick to forgive. Things like this. And then flaws are character flaws. I am quick to anger. I am too trusting. I burn pancakes every time I make them. I just cannot make a good pancake to save my life. Obviously, that last one is maybe not a great one, but I think you get the picture. I think we all know what flaws are. So within combat, moving to attacks and spellcasting, within combat, on your turn, you have an action, a bonus action, a reaction, and movement. And I'm not going to explain those right now because I don't know how long this video is going to be, but I'm 25 minutes into recording. This video is too long already. But you have attacks that will use one of those actions, or you can cast spells if you have them that take one of those actions. And this is just a place to list them. So you could list Great Axe. Your attack bonus, if you are proficient in a weapon, is your proficiency bonus plus the relevant stat, almost always strength or dexterity. And then the damage every attack will have a damage die. So a great axe is 1d12. A great sword is 2d6. And so you'll write that, and then plus the relevant stat modifier. So it could be like 2d6 plus your strength mod for a great sword. For a rapier, it'd be 1d8 plus your dex. Things like that. And then you would just list your any spells that you want to write here, because you'll typically have a separate spell sheet if you have spells. You would list like their names, their casting costs, casting time, and effects, things like that. Just try to cram them in that tiny little space. Features and traits are... So your class, every level, will give you certain features, and these are things like rogues get sneak attack, which allows them to sometimes do extra damage. Putting it very simply, this is not a video about the classes. But any features you get from your classes, any feats you take, anything like that, you will write in this box, and typically a short little description just to jog your memory of what it is. Other proficiencies in language is where you put tool proficiencies, game proficiencies, language proficiencies, anything else you're proficient in, because you need to know that. Are you skilled in artisan's tools? Do you speak Draconic? Put that in this box. For equipment, you have your equipment, armor, tools, rope, supplies, any of that. And then this is money. You have copper pieces, silver pieces, electrum pieces, gold pieces, and platinum pieces. Gold is the most commonly listed currency. There are 10 copper and a silver, 10 silver and a gold, and 10 gold and a platinum. You may have noticed I skipped electrum. That's because electrum is garbage, and I'm not going to discuss it. And then, now that we've covered everything on this sheet, hopefully I've made everything clear. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the comments, and I'll try to answer any questions I get. I'm briefly going to discuss, there's typically an optional character details page. If you were wondering where you would put things like your age or your height, weight, eye color, skin color, hair color, you put that here. You can, they typically contain a backstory, anything like that. And I'd like to make it clear that this is not the character sheet. This is a character sheet. There are different layouts and styles for character sheets, but they will all contain these same basic elements. So, you don't have to go out and find this specific sheet. This is just my favorite one. And whatever, I'll put a link for it in the description. And with that, I'm going to call it. So yeah, I hope this video was useful to you, and let me know if there's anything you'd like me to make a video about. In the meantime, you all have a great day. Yo, Editor Rowan here. You may have noticed I never went back to talk about inspiration. I asked you to remind me. Inspiration is just something your DM can give you, typically as a reward for doing something cool or achieving something. Inspiration just gives you advantage. You can expend one at any time if you have it to give yourself advantage on a roll. And yeah, so bye for real now.